Happy Pride to you all. I just wanted to share with you the most bizarre thing that I saw. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of pride washing or rainbow washing when people take advantage of pride to sell stuff. Well, the U.S. Army had an ad about pride, which included a infantry helmet, like one of the hard ones. And do you know how sometimes they have bullets in them? Well, these are striped with rainbow colors. So yeah. Oh, it's a good reaction. So happy Pride and not to the US Army, and I'm allowed to, well, you guys can say that too. Okay, so as Lydia said, so today I'll be talking about animal rights framed especially in terms of personhood. And when I say personhood, I don't mean an exact correspondence with human personhood, because we define ourselves usually in terms of intellect. So human language, mathematics, human music, statistics and observational and mathematics-based sciences, intentional and planned and changing architecture as opposed to an anthill or such, farming and medicine. We define ourselves by family units, romantic relationships, by war, whoa, geez, and negotiations for peace, by love and hate, and so on. Underlying these partial definitions is a sense that we plan for the future, that we learn, we change, we adapt, we build, and we recognize our mistakes. We prefer to attribute our abilities, skills, and learning to reason and intellect, but not to instinct or root. So now this is also a definition of averages and extremes because not everybody does things equally. Most people are not good mathematicians as well as writers, but at the same time, very few people do none of these things. But still, even though we may say that a person with great abilities are more personable, perhaps, we don't think of those who have few or no abilities as less persons than others. So, you can have all these attributes and be more interesting, and you can be less interesting, but still be considered a person. Except that sometimes we do. As everybody probably realizes, there's a long history of racism, of talking about other groups of people, racial groups, as animalistic or even just straight up animals. North America, United States in particular, because of slavery, Black people have been compared to various animal groups such as apes, unfortunately, and this still happened with Obama. People were still making memes about Obama. And slave auctions were compared to cattle auctions. Then there's the longstanding belief that human races are sort of like breeds of animals with specific abilities and advantages and disadvantages. So, this one's smart, this one's strong, this one's cunning. I hate saying these words, but there you go. This is still a thing today with race realism. I don't know if you've heard the term, but there's a term called race realism that says we're just ignoring how different racial groups are. And I'm sure you've heard of the great replacement theory, that white people are being displaced, etc. Because of the belief is that there are these major biologically based differences, and it's always the speaker's own race. There's the police. Thank you. The speaker's own race that is the best whenever they're talking. So if it's somebody who's white, which is in North America what we see, they're the smartest, they're the cleverest, they're the most beautiful. And there's some pretty hilarious quotes from the history of racism because they're trying very hard. So there's also then mongrelization as a term, mongrel races and half-breeds. People talk about half-breeds, and these are animal words. So there's that long, unfortunate history, which has not gone away. Then there's the mentally ill. And then there's people who resisted colonization or who are rebels. They're also called savages, and they're compared to animals. So that's the insult, that's the categorization, that's the attempt to depersonalize. And so there's this divide we want to make between real people and animals, and real humans and fake humans, I guess. But what is the difference? I would like to argue today, or just to say, rather than argue, just state, I just love this topic. What is the difference between the kind of personhood you might see in humans and that you might see in animals? Okay, so first off, the obvious one that's often brought up, they may not think, but they can suffer. Animals can suffer and fear. And everybody who looks at animals or who has animals knows that this is the case. Although, as a historical aside, Descartes, the philosopher, reasoned that since animals clearly could not have souls because only humans have souls, that animals therefore could not feel pain, and they were just acting like they felt pain. So there are some very strange beliefs about pain in animals. But we also know that animals can feel pleasure, they can feel love, they can feel friendship. So you know that this is the case when you look at animals, that they feel friendship within their own species. The kind of funny thing is, have you guys seen Ratatouille, the animated movie? Yeah, the funny thing is that not all of that is fake. There's actually quite an extensive social hierarchy of there's a social hierarchy within rat colonies, including poison taster. So the many rat colonies will have a dedicated rat for tasting poison, and this is not the rat highest up in the hierarchy. This is the rat at the bottom. So, but it's that's the sort of thing we think of as only something humans would do. So we know this with that animals can also bond with humans. So, there's foxes, there's crows. I keep meaning to feed the crows in my neighborhood so I can have my own little crow posse, because they will do that. Raccoons will come to become fond of people. And some more unlikely ones is bears, even occasionally polar bears, although that strikes me as a really bad idea. So these are partially instinctual actions, recognizing something of themselves in humans and vice versa. And they're also usually based in food. Okay, so most of them at least start with food. But be honest, this is also true of a lot of human friendships, right? This is the same thing. Going on dates, one of the things you do is you eat. Food is a big binder between people. So it's not necessarily that different. The friendships can change over time. The animals can grow bored. If you've ever had a cat, you can know that cats can get very bored of you, or they may bring more friends. One of the reasons I want to feed a crow is because then they bring other crows, and sometimes they can get very protective of you. And I thought it would be nice to have a crow posse. So they may bring more friends, or they may flee. Now, it's not just humans that animals bond with. Animals can form bonds across species, such as symbiotic relationships. The ones you've seen are probably things like the Cape buffalo getting bugs picked off of it by what apparently is called an oxpecker. So they get protection and food together. Then there's also the one that's my favorite, you may have seen, is a tiny frog who lives with tarantulas. The frog will protect the tarantula's eggs, and whatever the tarantula doesn't eat falls down so that the frog can eat it. So there's these symbiotic relationships, but those are instinctual. And then there's other things that are not just instinctual or symbiotic that seem to be more pure friendship. I forget where in Asia it is, but there are baboons that will adopt dogs. They will take the dogs in and they will have their puppies. And then there's the occasional chicken who lays on kittens. There's some adorable pictures out there of them laying on chickens, or laying on kittens. Geese, one of the things, especially injured geese, sometimes farmers will keep geese around because they will herd other animals. Like they will just start guiding them around to where they want to go. One of the funny ones is horses and cats get along very well. In many cases, it shows up in PG Woodhouse, and if you look it up, there's a lot of times when the cat likes to basically sit on the horse, and the horse seems to like it, and so they're just pals. And then there's all those other pictures you've seen on the internet of animals who are basically just hanging out together, like rabbits and deer. So I can't really verify those. So they will develop other kinds of friendships, not just ones that are based in food or protection. They can also develop the opposite, which is, hate and warfare. Now, between species, you can kind of see this as being, say if the bears and the wolves are at odds, then they're just looking for food or they're looking for territory. But even within the same group, there's groups of like, they're called murders, a group of crows called murders. I used to live in Pittsburgh, and there were 2 murders of crows that lived nearby, and sometimes they would come close together and argue. Like one would go caw caw, and the other would go caw caw. So you could tell that they were separate murders. They will argue. They develop animosities. Colonies of cats do the same things. But so you may say these are about food or territory, but that's also true of a lot of human wars. Human wars are not, not that war is ever elevated, but it's not any more less elevated than that. People looking for water, for food, for land. So we've got friendship. We've got some kinds of friendship that are not human. Maybe they're not as elaborated, but they're friendship. They're not just for pure self-preservation. The big one, of course, is reason, intellect, because this is humanity's claim to fame, that we are intelligent in a way that nobody else is, nothing else is. What's wrong today? So, because animals can't talk and they don't have thumbs, honestly, it can be really hard to tell how much they can think in a way we would recognize as thinking. But there is an entire field of animal intelligence. It's a field of animal intelligence. There's at least one journal out there. It's with a respected publisher, Joe Springer. So it's not like a crummy journal. So while I doubt that sparrows philosophize, there are many things that have been uncovered as being like thinking. The very basic one is just solving puzzles. We have to give puzzles to animals to keep them socialized. And if you think about it, to use a very Torntonian example, raccoons. Okay, a raccoon can get into anything it puts its mind to. And I have a friend who, when they first came out with those like latchable green bins, what my friend did is he latched it and took it, it was in the garage, and he started kicking it around and turning it upside down because he knew the raccoons would figure out how to get into it. So he was trying to mimic a raccoon's abilities. And you could believe that, right? If you've ever worried, oh no, is that a raccoon in the wall? Then you know what I mean. But even in smaller, less impressive or terrifying ways, squirrels. Have you ever had a bird feeder? Squirrels are really good at trying to figure out the puzzle, how to get at the food. Birds can figure out how to do things. Cats and dogs, I have no idea how the cats can get to the places that they do, but they do. And octopi, so, or octopuses rather. If you've seen the documentary My Octopus Friend, they can be extremely clever. And there's some really good stories of, one of my favorite ones is an octopus who figured out there was a tank of fish and they couldn't figure out why the fish were always like torn to bits. And then they put a camera on and the octopus was basically holding its breath, squeezing through the entrance to the tank, scooting across the floor, getting into the tank, eating all the fish, and then reversing. So, octopi or octopuses can be, not all of them, but, many of them can be. Now, all of these puzzles do center on food or escape. I will grant you that. But and trial and error, just hitting it until it breaks. But that's also true of a lot of non-scientific human puzzle solving. We do a lot of scientific puzzle solving that's much more, complicated than that. But then there's just a lot of things that are basically hitting it until it breaks or trying to get food or attention out of something. And this isn't even talking about apes and monkeys puzzle solving abilities. They're the best, but that would take all day. The one that, the part that seems much most unlikely are linguistic abilities among animals, but this is also a subject of academic study because, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. So there isn't a one-to-one correspondence between human language and animal languages. But to be fair, and to be exact, human languages don't define language necessarily. There's no reason why there can't be different structures that people would use. So linguists and philosophers have been trying for 300 years to figure out what language is, the varieties of it, why we use it, and more recently, how it is produced in the brain. So there are some animals that really do seem to have something like language, especially whales and dolphins. So they produce varied and responsive calls that are also rule bound, but also change within themselves. And for the whales in particular, they're at such great distances, sometimes like hundreds of miles, that you can't really see what it has to do with food. I mean, like there's food over here, swim 200 miles. So maybe mating, local conditions, whatever, but it's probably something more than that, and we have no idea what. Songbirds have some very interesting calls. They don't seem very bright to me, but the songbirds nonetheless have really extensive kinds of calls that basically change their words, their notes, their patterns, and in other words, don't seem to be a simple code, not just like woof, woof, woof. So then there are many other species that have clear sets of communicative sounds, like prairie dogs. Do you guys have prairie dogs up here? No. Okay, so they're US. Okay, well, they look like a gopher, but they do this wonderful thing where they pop up and goes, and then if there's any danger, and the other prairie dogs will duck down and then come up, and then they get the all clear, and then after a while they change guard. So the first prairie dog will go down, and another one will come up and be the one who goes when there's a problem. So they're adorable, and apparently they eat through everything, but they have a kind of communicative system like that. So there's also a species that use human words and symbols on occasion, not as well as we do, but there is a sometimes fierce debate over whether when a parrot is talking to you, whether the parrot is talking to you or just imitating the sounds, because parrots do seem sometimes to really talk back with specific phrases. Apes can use those little keyboards with like things like banana and like happy, sad. They can press buttons. And so for some species, it's also impossible to say what they're communicating, like cephalopods. We know they're communicating, we don't know how. Sometimes it's even just by light patterns on their back. A lot of them, like chameleon-like, and can produce patterns on their back. There are some theories that some of those are communication. So it's not language as we know it, but there's a range from, simple codes to what seems to be intentional and complex communication. So learning. Animals have to learn because they will die out if you don't know what to avoid. So some of this is natural, just like learning about your environment, about where the best food is, whether it's wholesome, whatever. That can be, often is, instinctual or based on superior senses and smells, being able to smell where something's off. But you remember the puzzle solving? It's no good to figure out how to open the bird feeder if you don't remember how to open the bird feeder and to learn a general pattern. So the simplest way to even just see this is to see how many animals can be trained. The animals can learn how to do things, and they're doing them for rewards, but they then use that training to get what they want to. And they remember how to do it. They can change it. For instance, they can change, like a guard dog can easily learn to guard different people or places. They can learn to do multiple things. And they basically can learn to respond to human commands. And on the flip side, many kind of instinctive behaviors, or what we think of instinctive behaviors, have to be trained. So cats and dogs have to train their kittens and puppies how to hunt properly, otherwise they'll be terrible at it. Otters have to be taught how to fish. You know, there's some things that you think of as instinctive that are actually learned. The best examples of these are apes and monkeys. I don't know if you've seen anything. There's occasionally there's a picture of an orangutan out there somewhere with a spear, which is kind of Planet of the Apes scary. But he saw human beings spear fishing, and so he made a spear and stabby, you know. Then there's the famous example, I think in Japan, of some monkeys where one of the, like an especially brilliant monkey discovered that if you got a bunch of grain that was thrown to you, the way to get the salt out of it was to dump it in the water and let the sand filter out, and that made it nice and salty. And then to basically scoop it up again. This is also passed on. You know, Coco the gorilla tried to pass on the signs that she knew to her baby. The monkeys have learned how to do this. This is not a one-off. They didn't forget. They all know how to do this. And there's no way that washing your brain is an instinctive behavior. I'm sorry, there's just no way. So there is a certain amount of learning there. Tools. There are, as I mentioned, the orangutan who used a spear. And most primates are the best at it, but they're not the only ones. Crows and ravens in particular are good at this. They did some experiments with crows and ravens, giving them a bit of wire, and the crows eventually figured out how to straighten it and stab it into a bottle to get food. Then when they recoiled it, the raven just went ahead and straightened it again so that it could get in. Elephants, it probably won't surprise you, can take sticks and scratch themselves. You know, they'll like strip them or like beat away the flies. And apparently at least once throw rocks at an electric fence. That one was the one I loved. It was this elephant who was flinging rocks at an electric fence to make it go off. So you also see, of course, the more simple ones, octopuses who use shells to dig in the sand, my octopus friend, or otters use the rocks. Apparently otters even have different rocks that they like, that they keep around. So I would argue that there is at least some kind of intelligence there. It's not the same as ours, but so animals haven't developed any of the sciences we're so prideful of, but the attributes or the abilities that those sciences came from, such as learning, adapting, and changing, I think that animals do that. So maybe much of this is instinctual or instinct or evolutionarily developed behavior, and much of it is learning by rote. But that doesn't necessarily matter. That's not true of a lot of human behavior, and this is true of a lot of things that we developed. It took, you know, trial and error, rote. And if you can't do that, you know, if you've got some sort of intellectual disability, you're still considered a person, just not, you know, just because you can't do it as well. So one thing I'd like to note is that we think of these, we think of these abilities as being apportioned out on a spectrum. You know, there's a certain number of things, sort of maybe a band of abilities that people fall on that different training allows you to do. And animals do fit onto these same continua, maybe in a narrower band, you know, maybe they're not, you know, we're not talking, well, let's get back to Descartes, you know, maybe they're not philosophizing, but, you know, they are communicating some sense of feeling. Different species are better at some than others, and different individuals are better at some than others. So the question for me is, what configuration of attributes, what minimum requirements of these groups of abilities and characteristics define the lower limit of personhood? So a lot of people, it's just obvious that animals aren't persons. Most of these people haven't looked at the studies because they're fairly new, and let's be honest, not everybody loves reading scientific studies, but instead go according to biases. And they don't consider that there's an alternative to their belief, even though the research says it is more complicated than what they say, or than what we would believe. But remember, there were were and are among, unfortunately, many people, large groups of people that they don't consider white people either. You know, racialized groups, women, gay people, trans people. So I would prefer to take my limited knowledge and err on the side of kindness. One thing that I also think about a lot is that the plight of most animals on this earth is our responsibility. Either we've hemmed them in or we've bred them to specific purposes, like nobody's going to take a chihuahua and chuck it into the wild. You know, we've bred dogs and cats and cattle in certain ways. We're responsible. You know, what is our responsibility? So it's not just the web of life for me, although that is the major one, but it's also the question of the worth and dignity of every person. And I would take it back to animals as well. Thank you.